Hello there. I mentioned in another video just a few days ago that the reason you see me peeking over the top of the title cards, it's a yellow letter size pad. It's not a legal pad, it's not legal size paper, but it's yellow. The reason you see me peeking over the top, I'm watching the timer down here in the lower left corner of the screen. There it looks like I'm pointing at where it is, but I'm actually pointing off to the side because of where the lens is. As for why I'm here, ego? I try not to be egotistical. I try not to be like everybody here in Albuquerque, self-centered to the point of not even noticing other people exist. But I do understand that I'm a human being and I have certain qualities, and some of them I think are pretty good. But in fact, the reason I'm here, let's narrow it down to this video, is to address a question and answer. That's the format of these Whisky Basics videos. The question is, what are some quirks of some different whiskeys? This is number 33. We're approaching the end, so this is more in the nature of interesting information than of essential information. And speaking of different whiskeys, I set that on what I call my platform. And I pour. I got more than I intended. I should have moved the glass that way. I didn't. And I'm going to move my notes and set that there. And you can see why I set it on the platform. I keep adjusting little things in my setup to try to make it better. Of course, every adjustment has consequences in other areas as well. And there are some adjustments I've made that I've discarded and gone back to how they were. Meanwhile, this is whiskey. Nice color to it. But what whiskey is it? It's from Oregon Spirit Distilling. Let's see, what do they call it? Oregon Spirit Distillers in Bend, Oregon. I've only seen their stuff in Total Wine, but it is an actual distillery. You can look it up on Google Earth, see the building, all that. And this is the only one of its kind I've ever heard of, a wheated rye. I don't know what the mash bill is. I don't look that up for these videos. But to be a rye whiskey, it has to be at least 51% rye. Usually a rye whiskey is a certain percentage of rye and a certain percentage of sprouted barley. The barley providing enzymes which help the fermentation and a little bit of flavor. The usual amounts are not going to add a lot of flavor. MGP has a famous rye mash bill, the 95-5. 95% rye and 5% barley. Whether there's barley in here, I don't know. I looked it up once. I did a review on Distiller. I don't even remember if I found the mash bill. Some mash bills, the distilleries keep tight to their chest for reasons I can't fathom. You could know the mash bill and never be able to reproduce this because the yeast is so important. The barrels, the climate, the construction of the barrel house. There's so many variables that knowing the mash bill is really useless. And besides, you can experiment around too and hit on the exact mash bill and never know it. So what's the point? but this is a wheated rye. It's at least 51% rye, but there is also wheat in there somewhere. And I have found that at least in sufficient quantities, wheat gives me eucalyptus. A lot of people talk about wheat being softer, and I keep thinking I've dealt with whatever it is in my eye and finding that I haven't. I think that maybe finally got it. People talk about wheat providing a softer nose, a softer palate. I'm not entirely certain what they mean by that. Certainly it would be less spicy for most people than rye. Most people get a lot of spice out of rye, or they get notes like dill or pine needles, such things like that, which I don't get. Maybe that's why I don't understand the softer thing about wheat, because I'm not getting the things that wheat softens for others. What it gives me is eucalyptus. I ran into that in Redemption wheated bourbon. And I've tried that, and I've tried Redemption, some other Redemption whiskey. They were okay, not enough to make me go back and buy more. This wheated rye I really like, but a little goes a long way. I've had this is my second bottle of this. I've had the Oregon Spirit bourbon and their wheat whiskey, and it's good, but a little goes a long way. I've gotten the eucalyptus from that Redemption wheated bourbon from everything I've had from Oregon Spirit, including this. Enough wheat gives me eucalyptus. And I'm already talking about some quirks of different whiskeys. This Oregon Spirit stuff has that eucalyptus note, has all that wheat in it. But, as I say, I've only found Oregon Spirit in Total Wine, and you might not be able to find it at all. So let's go on to something else. And now for something completely different. First on my list, and I don't have an exhaustive list, just 3 entries. 3. Then the first is Balcones Distilling. One must cleanse one's palate before one takes a sip of whiskey, lest one taste the whiskey. I try to keep the silliness to a minimum. I try to keep extraneous stuff out. I tried, especially on the previous video, and succeeded about as well as I could succeed in jumping over the moon. It winds up coming in because I am naturally kind of silly. And as XPFC Wintergreen would say, my prose is too prolix. As the novel Catch-22 went on, XPFC Wintergreen got a promotion. He became ex-Sergeant Wintergreen. But Balcones Distilling. Now, I've heard recently that there's another distillery or two that does this, but Balcones Distilling toasts all their barrels and then chars them. Now, I don't have a specific video on toasting and charring, so let me describe them here. Charring is necessary for the production of, under American law, for the production of bourbon whiskey, rye whiskey. My brain just went blank. It seems to me like there's another one. I believe it is necessary in what they're calling American single malt. It is forbidden in corn whiskey. There you have to use either uncharred barrels, new uncharred barrels, or used charred barrels. But most whiskey that you get that's made in the United States uses new charred barrels. And that's where, and you can either lay the barrel on its side or have it standing upright. Either way, a flame shoots through there and literally sets the inside of the barrel on fire, and that chars the inside. It essentially turns the outer layer of the staves, the wood, into charcoal, which provides a filtering effect. It filters certain things out of the whiskey, and then as the whiskey passes through into the wood, it picks up certain things from the wood as well. Toasting does not involve the contact of a flame with the wood. There might be a flame in the center of the barrel. And if you're doing it that way, the barrel has to be upright. You turn on its side, the flame will naturally do this and contact the inside of the barrel. But whether it's a flame, an electric element, hot air, whatever, it heats the wood, but no flame touches the wood. And this causes different chemical changes than charring does. And so when you char a barrel, when you toast a barrel, you are causing certain chemical changes. When you char it, you are causing different chemical changes. When you toast and then char, you get both. And that causes different flavors to come into the barrel than if you just char it. And that's part of what I call the Balcones touch, which causes Balcones whiskey to have a distinctive profile that nobody else has. Some are similar. Woodford Reserve Double Oak toasts the barrels, the second barrels, and then lightly chars them. And then the regular bourbon goes into those second barrels, and that's why it's Double Oak. And it was when I first tasted that Double Oak from Woodford that I thought, that tastes similar to Balcones. And I looked into things and found out that Balcones does that. An ink pen. I want to scratch things out. That big, huge hand right there. I wonder who's the giant. Tain't Andre, he's dead. The next thing I go to is peated whiskey. Now, you can make peated whiskey anywhere in the world. All you need is peat. Because the way you peat whiskey is you don't necessarily have to sprout the grain, although that's what happens in Scotland. Let me describe their process. They soak the barley in water, then spread it out, let it sprout, and then dry it. That's what they call malting in the United Kingdom. We have a perfectly good American English word, sprouting. Shall we speak American English? No, we are snobbish. Can you tell I have a definite opinion on that? And I don't know how to say this. It comes across that I'm making fun of people who import British language into American whiskey making. And yes, I am. But at the same time, if I met those people, I'd probably get along with them just fine. It's not them that I mock. It's the importation of terminology we don't need, because we have perfectly good words here in the United States. It's that unnecessary importation that I'm making fun of. And hopefully, I do have that distinction in my mind. Hopefully, anybody who watches this will understand the distinction and govern himself accordingly in his own opinions. But that's how you make malted barley. Oh, I know where I was going. Now, primarily on the island in the Inner Hebrides called Islay, Islay, Islay. In Scotland, it's probably something more or less like Islay. I have Scottish ancestors. I have never been to Scotland. I don't have a Scottish accent. And I've learned to sort of kind of maybe fake it a little, not only by listening to James Doohan playing Scotty on Star Trek, and he learned it from Scots he served with in World War II, but also I've picked up some ideas listening to actual Scottish people, some of whom I've met in person. Nobody famous. This wheated rye has that eucalyptus on the nose, it has it on the finish. In between, it almost tastes like a bourbon. There's cinnamon and brown sugar. It's a little tiny bit sharper than you'd get from a bourbon, at least as a general thing. It's good stuff, but the eucalyptus is, as I say, a little much. It doesn't take much to go a long way. So on Islay, and perhaps some other places, but it's prominent on Islay, they use dried peat to dry the grain. Now, as long as you're drying the sprouted barley, you can use hot air, you can use an overhead heating element, you can, whatever it takes to dry it, it works. You could use mesquite wood, you could use coal, you could use propane, what have you. But when you use peat, the peat smoke going up through that barley and drying it imparts certain very emphatic flavors and aromas to the final product of the whiskey. I am as much a chemist as I am a duck. As you can see, I am not a duck. But there's what they call phenols, and they measure those in parts per million. So if you have 3 parts per million, then if you have 1,000,000 cubic feet of air, of those million, 3 cubic feet would be phenols. If you have 3 cubic inches of air, then, well, that requires math. You want to know how good I am at math? 2 plus 2 equals 5. And they tell me that's not correct. Although, I do understand that 2 plus 2 does equal 5 for extremely large values of 2. That's an ancient BBS tagline. But that peat smoke rising up through the barley imparts those flavors. And so, now the only peated whiskey I've had is Laphroaig 10. I intend more or less fairly soon to try some Ardbeg, which is another peated whiskey. But on that Laphroaig, when you nose it, you get a very distinctive Band-Aid note. There's another chemical note that I know I have smelled before, but I can't remember what it is, and I've had 3 bottles of Laphroaig 10 so far. People say iodine. Just to be on the safe side, I bought me a little bottle of iodine. I sniffed it. Nope, that's not what I'm getting. It imparts a distinctive flavor to the whiskey, and underneath that, this Laphroaig has this delightful, light fruitiness. And so you're getting the emphatic and the hearty notes from the peat, and then the light and pleasant tropical notes almost from the barley. And Laphroaig 10 is the only whiskey I've ever tasted that gives me a pineapple note, and it does. But that's peated whiskey, and I may have confused you. I may not have enlightened you as much as I want. I don't have a video on peated whiskey. If you want to know about that or anything else in any of these videos, leave a comment, or you can look it up yourself, which there are people online who are on 53 different social media platforms who won't look up their own name, for Pete's sake. But at the same time, I'm putting myself out here with these videos. I don't claim to be an expert, but I do have the effrontery, the gall, the chutzpah to put myself out here as someone competent to provide at least basic information. So if you have a question, please ask it, and I will do my dead level best to answer. Then the third thing, and I'm already way beyond where I meant to be as far as time, so I'm going to try to rush through this. The third distinctive, or the third quirk, I mean to say, has to do with Four Roses whiskey. Four Roses has 10 recipes. And I wrote it down because I can never keep the numbers straight. They have 2 mash bills. One is a higher rye percentage than the other. I don't know what they are. And then they have 5 yeast strains. So 5 yeast strains times 2 mash bills is 10. And what scares me is there are people in the world today who probably cannot do that simple piece of math. 5 times 2. Use your fingers, and they probably still can't do it. American education is not education in any valid sense. Used to be, in the days before the education department, in primitive days, you were not educated unless you knew the Bible, unless you knew something of the Greek and Roman mythology, unless you knew something of history, unless you knew something of mathematics, unless you knew something of science. You could not call yourself educated unless you had studied some Latin. There were high school students who knew more about more subjects than today's university doctorates, or people with doctorates. I'm not joking. I've met people with college degrees who maybe knew their one subject better than I ever will, but knew nothing besides that. There are people with doctorates who cannot construct a coherent English sentence. How can you be educated if you know nothing about literature, nothing about history, nothing about civics, nothing about what have you? I chased a rabbit, didn't I? Four Roses has them 10 recipes. Their 80 proof bourbon is all 10. Their small batch, as I recall, is 4. Which 4, don't ask. Then they have a single barrel program. In their regular single barrel, they'll release, I think it's always the same recipe. And it's always O something S something, I think. I'm getting ahead of myself. They also have recently begun releasing different recipes, single barrels of the different recipes. I have a bottle of their OBSF. There are people who can tell you exactly what each letter means. I ain't one of them. Of all the things I ever have been, that ain't one of them. And this OBSF is there's such a thing as a bourbon drinker's rye. It's a rye whiskey that has a lot of similarity to a bourbon. This OBSF, at least this particular barrel, is a rye drinker's bourbon. It has a lot of similarities to a rye. Anyway, I'm going to have to cut it off. I'm already at 26 minutes. I hope I have given you some interesting information. It's not essential information, certainly. But as I say, we're getting towards the end of the series, of the playlist. I am so tired of rebuilding 36 videos. After this one goes up, I only have 3 more to do. And man, it's so tempting to just slough them off, but oh well. Meanwhile, to all, there are 68 subscribers. Now, whether all 68 watch every video, I don't know. But to all 68 subscribers and or all who put up with my thoroughly amateur ways, my thoroughly amateur production, I really appreciate it. Here is to you. Before I stop recording, I don't say this every video. I make it a point not to say it in every video. But please, like the video if you do like it. Share it if you like it and or you think it would be beneficial. And if you think this channel is not entirely awful, please subscribe. You know, I don't know how all the algorithms work. I know the computers record different things and then react. But apparently it does help. And because of the niche I'm trying to fill, I would like more people to know about the channel. Anyway, thank you. Please do those things. I'm now going to stop recording.